Okay, so this is the second workshop on belting. And again, I'm going to send everybody both videos so that you can review them later on. Sorry, things popping up. Okay. So yeah, I would love to start out with actually talking just really briefly about our own experiences with belting and our own ideas of what belting is, and our own relationship maybe with belting and our own voices. That would be a good place to start so that I kind of have a feel for where we're coming from. And I know Christine and I were just talking just really briefly just before we started recording, but I'd love to hear just a little bit about your experience and background with belting, and I mean, I guess why you're here, why you want to attend a belting workshop. What is this for yourself? Is this for your students? Is it, you know, something that you're struggling with? You just want more information? I don't know. Christine, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I was trained bel canto, suppose. I don't know exactly. That's what I was told back when I was young. I took lessons from when I was about 10 till 18. And I went into, I began working professionally singing more. My teacher was very upset because I went into more pop music, and I like Mariah Carey, kind of Whitney Houston kind of stuff. She was very upset. And so I'm kind of like a powerhouse belter. I never really thought about it until I started getting vocal issues, actually from acid reflux. And so now I really have to, like, after I got this reflux that messed with my vocal cords, now I really have to be very careful about what I do and how I'm belting. And I really try to go into my head voice more now, and I only belt on certain occasions. And I've studied some about belting. I took this one course, I can't remember what it's called, but this other teacher, and she was all about belting, about it being like talking almost, like, but I don't know. I just want to make sure I'm doing it right for me, to make sure that I can keep my voice, and that if I do teach it to my students, that I'm not telling them just what I know it to be, because I was not taught belting at all. So, yeah.
Janet?
Well, you know quite a bit about me. I'm kind of totally the opposite to you, that I just came to singing. Very elderly. I particularly like to, I like to sing musical theatre. I've gradually got to know my voice better. And I think, you know, I was so eager at first to be able to sing, for example, Suddenly Seymour, which I've just been practicing today, and I'm a whole lot better than I was. But you have to, I've only had like 2.5 years with an older voice that's been used for many, many years. Singing, I came to singing soprano in choirs, so that didn't help. I really didn't have any idea, but I'm very scientific. I was a dentist, and I just have gone full into trying to understand all the anatomy, physiology, physics, acoustics. But I really am realizing that you have to experience a feeling that goes together with a sound, and you can't speed that up. So gradually I'm getting there. I know I've heard different theories of belting, from it being calling out, as you say, like an extension of hey, so that you're not doing what my tendency was before, which is to go ha, sort of suddenly. But also some people will call belting what I hear, as I know now, as more of a mix, and others it's more speech-like. I've got a bit involved with still training, where it's a plain sound that isn't used, it's just used for a few spots, and then you come away from it. So yeah, I'm very interested to hear what you've got in mind, Karen.
So I think I mentioned this, and I know Janet knows, but this is a rescheduled time. So I've actually had stuff going on for the past 10 weeks. So it was a cold that turned into bronchitis that turned into walking pneumonia and sinus infection. So if I'm coughing a little bit throughout this, I apologize, but I have no choice. So just really briefly, my own experience with belting. I also had training that was belt conjugate. I actually had no interest in singing classical music, so my teacher didn't work on any rep with me. We just did technique. And I, at the time, was singing contemporary music and such. And he was very open to that because he himself actually sang in operas and also had a cover band that he toured with and stuff. So thankfully, he was open to that. But I did not, because of that training, I didn't really get training in contemporary styles of singing. And I actually really found it, even though I've never sounded like an opera singer, I feel like I would have benefited from having very specific training in very specific techniques, one of which is belting. And twang would have been really helpful. But I didn't get any of that early on. And so that was, I think, a hindrance for me, but also for me, and my first teacher used to tell me that singing is 80% psychological. And more as I work with students over the years, I realize how very true that is. And for me, I was somebody who was, I've always been very self-conscious about my voice. And I've always been somebody who was an under-singer. I liked sweet and pretty sounds, and I didn't trust my voice to do anything more. And so belting was a scary thing. Belting was something that I didn't think I was actually capable of because my voice is such a lyric instrument. I didn't think I could do any of that. I listened to other people who belt and I say, that sounds great, but they can do it and I can't. And I just accepted that for a couple decades probably. That, yeah, I just like, oh, you know, everybody else can do it, you know, or these people can do it, and those of us with light voices can't. And then it was really only a few years ago that I started exploring belt technique and trying to figure out, can my voice do this? Am I capable of asking more of it, demanding more of it than I have been? And, you know, that was in my early 40s. And so learning to be able to accept that, like, you know, just it does get a little bit more challenging as you get older. You get kind of deeply ingrained techniques and ways of using your voice, and learning to do things differently as you get older is something, it's a challenge, and I think it doesn't come as quickly and as easily for us as we get older. But I'm learning that it is possible, and I'm learning that even a light lyric voice has the potential to be able to belt. I am not higher voiced, I'm a mezzo, you know, but I've learned that sopranos can belt as well. We just have different things in our voices, different uniqueness. So my belt is not going to sound the same as a dramatic instrument belt is going to sound the same pitch, or the same section of the song. And learning to accept that, I think, also was really important for me, was to understand that there are different aesthetics with belting. And I think that we can expect different things from our voices because we are unique. We all have unique instruments. So if you listen to somebody like, I love Sutton Foster. If you listen to Sutton Foster sing, she's a great belter, but she doesn't have a super heavy belt like a Kelly Clarkson, for example. You know, Kelly Clarkson has a meatier sounding belt, it's deeper sounding. And learning to be able to, I think, hear these different sounds was really important to me, because that was ultimately what helped me realize that I could do this. I just won't sound like her, but I can sound kind of like her when I sing. And hearing that, I think, was really important for me, because it just changed my whole relationship with belting. So we just have to get to a point, I think, where we believe we can do it and we trust that our voices can handle it. If we do it properly. So I did want to start out, for the first little bit, I just want to talk about belting, what it is, what it isn't, and the aesthetics of belting. And I think, you know, Janet, you touched on this too, that we're often taught that belting is just kind of a yell or a call. And I mean, acoustically speaking, that's what the research does show, that you're basically, you're there's this acoustic coupling with the first formant of the vowel, the lower resonance frequency of the vowel, and the second harmonic of the sung pitch. That we're coupling those two, and as we go up higher in pitch, we're locking into that yell resonance coupling. And so we basically, as we go higher, we have to shorten our vocal tracts and we have to raise that first formant to go along with the higher pitch. And that is true. However, what I've discovered in my own voice as I started exploring belting was that the yell approach did not work. If you're just in the pure, hey, it's really locked and really fixed. And there's no flexibility in there. You can't vary the dynamics. You can't really alter the color, the textures in your voice. You can't really go from that same coordination into a vibrant sound that has vibrato. And I tried that for 4 years. I'm like, okay, I can yell up to A5 now. Now what do I do with this sound? And as much as I did, I can yell and it's comfortable, it's fine, it just sounds like crap. It always just sounded inflexible and it just didn't sound musical. And I'm like, there's gotta be something different. And so I don't know, Christine, how much you know about me, but I sing a lot of musical theater. That's kind of my main thing now. I've gone back and forth between pop and rock and musical theater for decades. In more recent years, I've just kind of really focused a lot on musical theater. So learning more of a mixed belt where it is a little lighter and flexible, but it has a longer closed quotient. So the closed quotient refers to the amount of time during each vibratory cycle that the vocal folds are making contact with each other. So there's that wave, right? They open and close. When you have a longer closed quotient, they're touching for a bit longer. And that contributes to higher pressures and louder sounds, a louder sound source signal. And so I've learned to kind of use that so that I'm not digging in and getting into yell where I have no control over it. And so that I can make it musical and I can make it fit with the style that I sing. But then you will listen to, I'm going to just play a few clips from some singers, mostly musical theater, just because they were the ones on the top of my head that I could just think of, like, oh, here are these different sounds with bell. Do you sing musical theater at all, Christine?
I do. I've done, when she said Suddenly Seymour, I was musical director for Little Shop last year. So I'm like, oh, that's so yeah, I do.
Yeah, I'm currently obsessed with Somewhere That's Green. I just love doing the accent in particular. It's my favorite part. I don't know, and it just fits my voice because my voice is a little lighter and it works perfectly. Having a little troubles breathing here. All right, so I'm going to play these. I'm going to share my sound with you guys. It's not going to share the screen. Every time I do that, I can't get it to work properly. So screen, just give me a second here. Advanced. Computer sound, I think is how I did it last time. All right, tell me if you can hear this, just for a sec. No good deed will. Are you able to hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if it was too loud. All right, so I'm gonna actually skip ahead just a second here. So Ben Platt and Dear Evan Hansen, he does what might be traditionally called traditional like yell belt. All right, I'm gonna play that for you guys for a second. All we see is light, 'cause the sun burns bright. We could be alright for forever this night. Okay, so this is Jessie Mueller, and she used to be mine from Waitress. So Ben's is a little bit more mixy, but here with Jessie Mueller, you can actually really hear she's on the full, hey, kind of approach with some of these notes here. All right, so I don't know if you can hear with Jessie Mueller, she actually has a little bit of tongue retention. that's contributing to some of the darkness and heaviness in the sound. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Just so you know, I can't see you right now. So I'm going to share something else here. So I've got a couple clips here, 2 or 3 clips, where we're doing, there's this like swallow reflex approach to belting that I hear in some singers, especially when they're singing the back sounds, back consonants like G. They use like a hard G or a hard K to sort of bounce into the sound, spring into the sound. But you can hear this with like Idina Menzel, she's doing it, and with Kimiko from Waitress 2 in, oh, I can't even think of the name of the song. Yeah. Anyway, you can hear that they're using the hard g sound to go g, g, almost like a swallow into the sound, and it's kind of it creates an interesting effect.
No good deed will I do. Someone who, when he sees me, wants to again.
I don't know if you can hear that at all with the in there. Were you able to hear that at all? It's very subtle g g g in the sound, and so it's a plosive, the g, right? It creates pressure in behind that closure. And whenever you have some sort of pressure and a narrowing inside the throat, the air speeds up. Physics says that when air molecules get compressed, excuse me, to go through a narrower space, they speed up. And part of that speeding up, or the result of that speeding up, is a louder sound. So that's one way to achieve that sound, is to compress the air at some point along the vocal tract. It can be compressed at the glottal level, but here we're seeing that it can also be compressed elsewhere in the vocal tract. And we're going to get into more of this in a bit, but I just wanted to kind of share some different sounds that we might hear with belt. So here we have like Kiala Settle in The Greatest Showman, and what you can hear, she's actually using a twang approach to belt, where when you sing it, it's a very gospel thing. In gospel music, you often hear that really brassy, bright sound when they're singing in like the 5th octave and they're belting up there. And you actually do hear it too on Defying Gravity with Idina Menzel, where it sounds like she's belting on the F5, but in actuality, she's just kind of like cranking up the twang. And the twang itself can, when things are properly shaped in the vocal tract to make twang, it can actually increase the decibels significantly. So when you get to a certain point where you just can't drag up that much vocal weight, you just twangify it, and then it becomes louder just because of the twang and how it hits our ear because of the frequencies being so high. But again, we're going to get to the technique and stuff in a minute. But yeah, so here you can hear her, got her in a few places.
Then break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us. Oh, you're glorious. When the shot, look out, 'cause here I come. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching out to the beat of drum. Marching, marching, marching.
So you can hear she's just kind of like screaming into the sound a little bit. It's kind of more of a scream. So then I wanted to share my friend Sutton Foster, who's not really my friend. But this is like on the Rosie show she sang Gimme Gimme. And here you're hearing more of that lighter mixed belt that we hear a lot of in musical theater, because it is so flexible and you can easily move in and out of it into mix and then back into a light belt.
I don't care if he's a nobody. In my heart, he'll be a somebody, somebody to love me. I need it.
All right. So I don't know, can you hear the difference there? You're hearing how it's just, it kind of sits on more of like a thinner edge in some ways. It's still a belt. When she says the me, you can actually hear some of that, the tongue root tensing as well. And that is part of the technique that some singers use for belting, not everybody. I try not to use that technique because I'm always like, tongue root. That's one thing I work really hard with my students on, not letting them use the tongue root for things. I'm going to share one last clip, and it's of my student. It's kind of a bad recording because it was downloaded off of Facebook, and it was one of her school talent shows. You can't really see it. She's 17, but her mic is like out here. It's like way back here. And then this recording is taken way back in the audience. So that's how loud she is. Like when I have to dial down her belting because it is so loud. And she uses this really interesting technique, which I did not teach her. She just kind of came into singing with this technique where she does, like, you can hear this almost like if you listen to Pavarotti or another operatic tenor, how they have this compressed sound. And you can hear that there's like a huge, like sort of a narrowing, and you can hear it, like the sound is on one hand contained, and on the other hand, it's kind of coming, it's really coming out. I don't know if I can explain it exactly, and I don't think it comes through 100% here, but live, like right in front of me, it's crazy. It's like this very compressed sound, which I would love to achieve. Unfortunately, yeah, it's kind of a bad recording. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's got this very compressed sound. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just, there's definitely a narrowness inside her vocal tract that I can hear that really causes this huge, huge sound, like the kind where your ears want to shut down to protect themselves. All right, so the reason why I was sharing that, I know I didn't share a lot of pop and rock just for lack of time, but is just because there are different aesthetics. And that's, I think, really important for us to understand that I think that we have to, especially if we're singers who sing in different styles, we have to alter our belting approach according to the style in which we're singing, because it is different. Pop belting is different from musical theater belting. The aesthetic is slightly different, the approach is slightly different, and that's really important for us to know if we're going to become skilled at belting and if we aren't going to just sing in one style. So, trying to think, but I want to make sure that we talk about belting vowels. So I don't know, Christine, how much you know about vocal acoustics and stuff. So if there's anything that I say that kind of just goes over your head, please stop me, let me know, and I'll explain it differently, because some people know more and other people haven't really studied it much. So when we're talking about belting vowels, there are some vowels that are more conducive to belting. Those vowels are the high first formant vowels. Those are your as, your a's, and your ahs. Ahs are not a bright brassy vowel, but they're great for getting kind of a deeper belt sound. Any of those vowels that sit a little bit higher in terms of their first formant. But the really bad vowels are your e's and oo's that have the lowest first formants, because those are really good head voice vowels. We use them a lot in training head voice because the voice just turns over earlier into a lighter mechanism. So when we're training with our students or ourselves, that's really important for us to know, is that there are just some vowels that we're not going to be able to sing in a belt, and that we have to modify, we have to adjust to some extent. If you listen to Lauren Allred when she's singing Never Enough from The Greatest Showman, right? If you ever hear, she says, for me, for me, for May. How she completely breaks the vowel. She's not even modifying, she's just completely singing a different vowel. Dear Evan Hansen, same thing, where you hear where the two guys, Connor Murphy and Evan Hansen, are singing that duet, and I can't remember the name of it right now. And they're doing the same thing. Sincerely me, sincerely May. And they go to this A vowel, A, somewhere in there. And you can hear that throughout pop music and musical theater and rock. And some of it is an intentional, like when somebody says baby, it's probably because they just, baby sounds too cutesy, I think. It doesn't sound cool. But when you can hear them kind of amping up and moving into a belt, you can hear the vowel changes the louder they get and the higher they get. And this is either intentional or unconscious, but it's necessary because, again, we cannot belt on an E or oo. There are things that we can do to trick the ear, things that we can do to trick our bodies singing those vowels. Like if I'm singing Pulled from the Addams Family, and there are all those D4s on an oo vowel, well, that's kind of a bad pitch to be putting a belted oo on. So I actually go into like an ew, when I do that, like, what do I do? It's been a while since I've done that song. But it's all these oos, back-to-back oos on these vowels, and I have to kind of go into like an ew, or an like the French ew, to make the space behind here smaller so that I can create something that sounds like an oo. And initially I had to go into like a real ew, and then I started to be able to shape it a little bit more into something that sounded like a speech like oo. So that's really important. That's something that we have to explore as we move along, is trying to find the right vowel for us. And knowing which vowels are more conducive to belting is what's ultimately, I think, going to help us. Having that information at our fingertips is what's going to help us make the right decisions about how to belt. So the first thing with belting is, I think that you do have to have a really good foundation, both in chest voice and head voice. I think that you need to have a decently strong, at least lower head register. You don't necessarily have to have a tremendous range, but at least, for us females, maybe up to our G5. It needs to be pretty strong, I think, up to there. Because otherwise what happens is we get stuck in just this pure heavy chest voice mechanism, and we're unable to let the vocal folds thin just a little bit while staying in this belt. And the next thing that I think is really important is having a mixed voice, being able to kind of straddle both registers to some extent, and mix can be defined different ways, in different ways. I think of it as having, above our break, as having a similar closed quotient to what's below our break. And also speech-like vowels, I think, to me, is really important. That's one of the things that differentiates, I think, head voice from like a head mix, for example, for me, is the sound of the vowel. To me, it has to have that squeaky sound. If the vowel is modified and it's tall and rounded, that's head voice. That's not going to get me where I need to go in terms of belting or mixing. And then, of course, twang. So I always start with twang before I do anything else with students. And we go through several exercises, and I just make sure that they get this feeling of things being here. And feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions, Christine. I'm open to interruptions. I just want to make sure that you're tracking with this, and I'm not losing you or anything. So yeah, so I teach them to get this feeling of the sound kind of being here, even though I'm not talking about placement per se, but when we feel it inside the throat, generally speaking, that means that we're tensing something or we're muscling our way up the scale. We don't want that feeling. We want that feeling of release and passivity inside the throat. I think for all singing, but I think especially for belting, where we want to feel the work happening really is here. We want to feel that work happening down here with the support musculature. If we're feeling it here, then that's when we're going to do something not so great to our voices. So yeah, twanging through that helps to create those higher frequencies And the bony structures of the face are really good conductors of the vibrations associated with those high frequencies. So when I say, you kind of want to feel it here, it's not because you're placing the sound there, but what it means is that you're achieving the resonance with those higher frequencies in place. And when those higher frequencies are there, that's when you're getting that sympathetic resonance or the sensations associated with it more here than back here. Do we need to go over some twang exercises? Would that be a good start?
Yeah, I don't even know what that, like, I've never even heard of twang. I saw your workshop on that, but so.
Okay, so twang really is a bright, ringing quality in the voice. In classical music, it's like that, you get that chiaroscuro, right? It's that chiaro aspect of it where you get that ring in the voice. And generally speaking, when we're twanging, we're augmenting those frequencies in the 2800 to 3000 hertz, just like the singer's formant. We're just possibly achieving it differently. So I saw a workshop, or I guess a webinar with Chadley Ballantyne and I always forget her name. It's
Carrie Obert.
Thank you, Carrie Obert. Carrie. All right. Yeah, and so she was talking about the physiology. He was talking more about the acoustics. And so they were comparing the singer's formant and the physiological differences between that and twang. And she refers to it as sort of two different ways of twanging. The one is a lower twang, where there's that epilaryngeal narrowing that we get more in classical music, where the laryngeal tube, the outlet, just narrows a little bit. And that, that 1/6 ratio, where it's like if it's narrowed just the right amount, you create those frequencies. It's almost like it's a mini resonator within the resonator track. And then she talked about there being an upper twang. And the upper twang is what we typically use in contemporary styles of singing. And that involves a little bit of tongue root action, which I'm always, again, cautious of, but it's true. I think when most of us twang, we do tense the tongue root just a tiny bit, but there's a healthy way, I think, of doing that, where it doesn't interfere with the sound and it doesn't interfere with function. And then it's also accompanied by narrowing of the pharynx. And that's where most of us have it. Like when I sing wah, wah, I feel a little bit of narrowing. I feel that narrowing. When I belt with a twang, I feel even more narrowing, which we're going to get into in a little bit. We'll explore more fully. But yeah, so it's, yeah, what I just demonstrated was twang. It's kind of like, you can think of it as like the baby's cry, the, like a whine, mom, ah, ah, ah. It's like, witches cackle, ducks quack, all those sounds. Is it like, what is it? Witchy-strega? Is that what the witches cackle? It's used also sometimes in classical singing to train that singer's formant quality in the voice. Well, maybe let's just take a minute to explore that, just because I think the twang is what keeps it belt healthy. It's what keeps it from our having to work in the throat more than what we want to, or feel like more than we should. And I guess that's one other thing actually I want to note in this. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going all over the place. But with the belting technique, I think when we think about belting, we do think about it being difficult and a lot of work for our bodies, and we feel like we have to force and push and strain. And that's the one thing I always try to work on with students, is getting them out of that mindset. Because as soon as they think belting, what do? They start overworking. They start working much harder than they need to, and they start instead of working smarter, they work harder. And so the twang is one of those things that actually helps us work smarter, because again, we're tuning the frequencies, we're tuning like the dial, so to speak, to those higher frequencies that hit the ear more powerfully. It increases the decibels without us having to do any extra work. All we're doing is adjusting the vocal tract in a way that is makes it more efficient and easier to achieve. And then once you get that pressure off the vocal folds and you get the work happening sort of in different places inside the vocal tract, then I think you can get a more compressed and heavier sound in a healthy way. Excuse me. So let's again, I know you've done this before, but let's do just a twang exercise. And what we want to do is we want to get like that whining kind of sound, and we want this crystal clear. I always say it kind of sits on the edge. You don't want like nya nya nya, like really heavy. Nya, it sits right on the edge. Nya 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 nya. I'm in chest voice, but I'm not going nya 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 nya. Nya 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 nya, like I'm teasing. Let's just go up with scale a little bit with this. Nya 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 nya. Good. So when we get to about this point at the top note, we have a choice to kind of stay in chest voice or to move into head voice. We're coming up on that break area. And I work it either way. But I feel like this exercise, especially if it's the first twang exercise that I'm working on with myself and my students, I just let it move into head mix. I go a little bit higher than this before I get into head mix, but I can demonstrate it. It's still this really focused, twangy sound, but that's definitely my M2. That's my mode, my second mode of singing. I don't force because that's what it would sound like. I mean, I can do it. It's just not very flexible. I can't do much with it. So let's go back to here. Were you able to get into that kind of head mix where it still had that really bright, pingy sound? Does it transition pretty evenly, seamlessly?
Yes.
Sorry, after you.
Oh, Christine?
What? Sorry?
Oh, she was saying she thought you were going to speak. Janet thought you were going to speak.
No, I was just saying I was good. So I was like,
Oh, okay. What were you going to ask, Janet?
I was just going to ask about aspects of airflow, because I think sometimes that can be the issue, is that as I feel I need to make more effort, I forget to keep enough airflow. What would you say about airflow?
Yeah, so belting is because the vocal folds are more compressed, right? You have that longer closed quotient, so the vocal folds are together for longer. It is a high pressure, low airflow technique. So you don't have, as compared to like a lighter sound, you don't have as much airflow through the vocal folds, past the vocal folds, and you have a higher pressure. So
But what about for this kind that we were just doing when it gets quite high?
I don't think too much about it. I focus on the pinginess and maintaining the sound.
Yeah.
And when I do it though, I don't go into I don't let it go airy. I go into like my Ethel Merman.
Yeah.
Because it's more like it's like a witch's cackle. And when I want a bigger sound, that's what I do there. And the twang, I feel like the twang, if you do the twang correctly, it kind of helps you find that balance of air pressure and airflow.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't think you have to overthink it. And that's the other thing too with belting. I think sometimes we do overthink it. And we'll talk about that more later on, but there are things that I do to help students find belt where we sort of bypass our conscious brains. We bypass all of those preconceived ideas of what belting is and how it should feel and sound in ourselves. And we just we use things like excited speech and, just vocal phrases that get them belting without realizing that they're belting. And then once they do that, they realize, oh, that's how it's supposed to feel. That's how it's supposed to sound. But yeah, I mean, I just always make sure that, so I apologize for that note. It needs to be repaired. So yeah, even when I get up into like the 5th octave, I'm using a little bit of that. I'm not going, I'm not going into the tall, rounded vowel, which you don't want to do here. You actually want that feeling of narrowing as you get up higher. And again, Christine, I mean, you sing different styles too, so you're familiar probably with the sensation, but in classical singing, it doesn't feel that way, right? It definitely, there's a different shaping that you're using. And here, we're using more the divergent megaphone shape, where things are more open in the front and more like narrower at the back, as opposed to classical, which is that way, it's a little narrower at the front and much more open at the back. That's the opposite of what you want here with belting. You want the megaphone. It's set up in such a way as to narrow, right? To compress those air molecules, narrow them, speed them up as they go through and create that powerful sound. All right, do we need to go through any more of that there? All right, so the other big component, so the twang is the first thing, being able to get that feeling of it kind of being more here than pushing from here. The second thing that I always do is I teach crying into the sound. And this is the other thing, Janet, that's going to help with the airflow and the pressure. So the cry naturally thins the vocal folds but compresses the sound at the same time. So it's kind of like with saw, we've got, it's darker, it's low larynx. Cry is like that whimper, a puppy dog cry that you might get. Like if you try that for a second, you should probably feel a little bit of narrowing as you make the whimper. It should kind of squeeze, a good squeeze inside your throat. Do you feel that narrowing? So Ingo Titze was describing it in a workshop that I saw of his a while back as sort of like he was talking about using more posterior compression vocal fold. So when we're in pure chest voice, which if you read a lot of the research, they'll say belting is chest voice, but it's not 100% like pure chest voice. It's not just chest voice. Just chest voice is using mostly this medial compression, using the muscular body of the vocal folds to compress them together, to bring them together. Whereas when we're doing this whimper, what we're doing, and when we get to a certain point, like around our break, we have to start using more posterior compression right here, these interarytenoids, to bring those arytenoids together to compress from back. There is some still medial compression that happens, but doing this. So Ingo Titze describes it sort of like if you see a mouse, that whole stereotypical, "Ee, a mouse!" That squeezing, that's your LCAs in there, your lateral preaxial arytenoids. That's compressing the sound. So when we're doing our whimpering, that's what we're using. So now what we're doing is we're exchanging some of the weight. We're still getting compression, but we're kind of exchanging it for a different type of compression. Does that make sense? So we're still bringing the vocal folds together, keeping them together, and we're trying to keep the closed quotient long, but we're not overly like weighing it down. And that's when it becomes dangerous, when I think you're dragging up too much weight. And that's when my own experience was trying to like learn to bring up chest voice higher, was that I was over compressing and I wasn't moving enough air. So I always felt like I couldn't breathe through it and I couldn't catch my breath. I felt like I was stacking up breath pressure. And that's what you don't want also in belting. There still needs to be a flow of air, even though it is, again, high pressure, low airflow through the glottis. You need to still have some flow. So there's a balance there. But I feel like the cry really helps with that a lot. So what if we do, sorry. So what if we do like pick your pitch, doesn't matter to me. So there I'm kind of going in like sort of mix. I'm right between registers. And you want it to be a nice strong sound, but you want that in the sound, because again, that's going to help you find better balance at the glottal level. So why don't you try that like on different pitches, or a little lower. And see how you
Oh.
yeah, and then go up a little bit higher and just play around with it, how that feels, keeping the compression in the sound. And don't back off on it, because it's easy with the whimper to go and get really light and almost airy. I'm turning my thing up. So let me know when you're ready. All right, so let's take that sound. Let's put it here. Ma, ma. Make sure you get that strong whimper first. Crying into the sound. Ma. Okay, so let's try it like a little bit out. Ma, ma. And I don't know if you can hear that. I was going ma, I'm going into back vowel, right? If you want to try ma, you can hear the difference. Like ma, ma. You can hear the difference in the brightness, right?
Which one did you want?
I was thinking ma, but if you're anything like me, your back vowels turn into back vowels. they're harder to get that pinginess and the brightness,
Yeah.
which is why I use a lot in my own singing. But you can play around with it because you want to use different vowels and just learn to cry into the sound, regardless of what vowel you're singing. I find it easier to cry up higher. Yeah, so if you try to even like you can hear in the sound, right? There's a little cry.
I think I'm doing it wrong.
Can I hear?
Okay. Ma, may. I sound too. I don't hear. I don't know if I.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like a little too much head voice in there, I think, for that pitch.
Okay.
Even though I know you, like you said, soprano, right?
Me?
Are you soprano?
I'm not.
You're not. Okay. Okay. Then that's, I would say, probably for that pitch. We just on the G there.
Okay.
What happens if you do like a heavy? Okay. So try not to pretty it up so much.
Okay.
So don't think of it as singing, right?
Okay.
Like you're crying into it. Better.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would get rid of, if you can, I would get rid of the vibrato.
Okay.
So when you have vibrato, it's harder to lock into that resonance
Okay.
that's going to give you. So you'll notice, like with belting, that it's pretty much always straight toned until like the end of it. Then they add a little vibrato to kind of give it a different texture. So think of it more as your like soft yell, like your cry, crying into the sound.
Ma, ma, ma.
Yeah. Yeah. And now what if you went right into like a yell?
Ma. I can't.
Okay, have it.
Okay, one more. Ma.
Yeah.
Then
I still think I still feel like you're kind of control the sound too much, like you're trying to sing, right? And I know you're used to that with bel canto, where it's beautiful singing. It's all about that. But learning to be able to kind of like, hey, just yell into that, like just be okay with that. Like when I do the hey, I keep it controlled. But I don't know if you heard that. Once I get to a certain pitch, I have to cry into it. Hey, hey, hey. Like try that for a second with a little.
Hey, hey, hey.
Yeah, that's good. Jenna, are you doing okay with this? Okay, so, well, I was gonna have you doing like try to explore it. You can even try okay, breathe. So yeah, so you can try that. Like you can try seeing what happens when you do different pitches. When you just maybe just do a third for now. Just like actually, let's go up here.
Okay.
You wanna mute yourself for a second, Christine?
All right.
We're just gonna go up just maybe a little bit. We're not gonna go too high with this one.
Okay.
I don't expect you to necessarily stay in like 100% chest voice up on the D there. That's getting kind of high for a lot of singers.
It so feels like letting go if I go to the head voice place.
You don't want to go to head voice with this though. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you mean then not staying in chest? To mix,
I mean, again, the research shows that you're pretty much, there's a lot of TA involvement when you're singing this. So there's a lot of chest voice involvement when you're belting. And there's a higher closed quotient. So again, if you add the cry but stay in chest voice, it has the effect of keeping the compression, keeping the closed quotient. But there's a certain point at which you do go into twang, right? You go into the twang belt. And for most of us, that's, D, E, F, somewhere in there, where it just, at some point, it just, you just don't want to be bringing up like 100% chest. It just won't sound good, and it probably won't feel good. So what if we did, what if we switched to like words instead, and we just said, Mom, but now do it like a really whiny voice, right? Mom, Mom, and just go up in pitch, right? And keep it, wah, keep it in that like twangy space. Mom, Mom. Yeah, so you're laughing again, Christine. So when I do it, you hear I don't go to mom, because if I go to mom, Mom, I go into the yell. But that again to me is locked and inflexible. So I go ah, Mom. Hear the difference, right? Mom. So I go Mom, Mom. I can't go anywhere with it. Mom, Mom. Like,
And so for that reason, the suddenly shouldn't be on the C sharp.
yeah, see, I don't, you can do an ah because of its high first formant, but I feel like the ah for most of us tends to,
But not not like as in suddenly. I want to hear Christine suddenly Seymour.
Sure. Really?
Yeah.
You want to hear it?
Mm.
Seriously? Okay. Suddenly Seymour is standing beside me. I don't have, what does it say?
He don't give me orders.
He don't give me orders. He don't, what is it? He
Condescend.
He don't
Condescend.
condescend. Suddenly Seymour.
Yeah. So you do the cry naturally.
yeah.
Yeah.
And see, I would say that's like, that's a mix that you're doing there, where it's kind of sitting on this edge more so than a belt, because it's not, you don't hear that kind of trumpet-like sound in there.
Okay.
But I think that's what it should be, though.
Yeah.
The vast majority of how we, yeah, the vast majority of our singing should be done in chest voice or mixed voice, right? We're,
Yeah.
you know, depending on the style of what you're singing, but contemporary stuff is mostly in like a mix in this area. The belting is only something that we reserve for choice notes. It's not, if you listen to any good singer, they're not belting their way through the entire song, right? They're just belting the occasional note when it makes artistic and technical sense to do so. Yeah, but all you have to do is turn that. So it's like, so if I did like, let's see, I have to go through that chorus. She is hard on herself. So I can belt that or I can mix it. Hard on herself. Hard, 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 hard. The difference is there. Do I go into like that more yell? Because down there it's yell for me. I can't do the mixy, like edgier kind of belt down there. Like it's, yeah, like an F. It's too low for like a belt note. So my tendency with that vowel is to want to go hard on yourself. Hard, hard. To sit on that edge is more challenging for me on that section there. But it's like, used to be mine, right? I want to go into the mine, like yelling it, right? Mine. If I go a little brighter and twangier with it, like it's less locked. Sorry, I've been out of practice. But when I definitely, you can probably hear the difference though, right? Ha, 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 where it's a little wah, mom, ha, But it's also like your mixed belt, where it's lighter, it's more flexible than the like mine. I can't like I can't stop. I can't go anywhere with that and get adding vibrato or adding colors and textures. Like you hear, right? It's darker, it's heavier. Can you hear the difference? I don't know how it's coming across on here. But basically I go into the used to be, and then I go into the mom, mine, mom. You can hear them cry, right? Mine. That's where I go with that. That's where I get felt. Yeah, I mean, the other thing too, I don't know if you want to try that, actually, try that for a second. Like, I don't even know what note that was. It's not a high note, but try that for a second where you try going into the call, like that, hey, right? Mom, mine, and then try like the mom, mine, like try and how it, pay attention to how it feels in terms of how your body connects to that sound too. So what did you experience, Janet?
I think one of my big things, has been being more gentle on the consonants, because I can tend to, when you feel like you're going to make a strong sound and you want to go like that, too much on the M and N. Yeah, and even the S for the suddenly. That was a big thing for me. But yeah, I just feel I've got to a stage where I can relate more the sound to a feeling and try and get in that way. And the sound, the mom, keeping on coming back to that is really helpful for me, getting the right quality.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So in Thursday's workshop, I had a couple other attendees as well, and they were saying the same thing. The mom thing actually was the best thing that we did.
Yeah.
They found like they just got them because, again, I think you're bypassing your conscious brain. You're bypassing the brain that's saying this is singing or this is selfie.
Yeah.
And now you're just like, hey, mom. You're just calling, or like even like you're calling to some guy across the street, right? Hey, like oh, you're so cute. Hey, and getting into that as opposed to hey, hey. Like you're not going to call like hey, Mallory, right? You're not gonna call like that, right? It's gonna be like hey, right? And it's like there's this natural cry in there. There's a natural twang and brightness in there, and that to me is the best way to find that flexibility in the sound. Like I know we've done that, Janet, I think we've done that rainbow exercise, right? The Melissa Cross rainbow exercise. Have we done that?
I don't recognize it, so I could have forgotten.
Oh, okay.
Melissa Cross.
Yeah, Melissa Cross. Like she has the Zen of Screaming, right? So she specializes in like extreme vocal techniques. But she has this thing where she paints this rainbow on a whoa. So she's like, whoa. And it's this little rainbow, right? And so it's shorter in duration, not as high in pitch. And then she paints another arc over top of it, so it's a little higher and a little bit longer in duration, and then yet another rainbow, and she kind of stops there. I always kind of stop there and then come back down. But you're doing like a whoa, so it's a different vowel here, and O had like its formant is kind of in the middle between the other vowels, the other extremes. But when you do it, it's all like this heavier chest voice I find in this yell, but whoa, whoa, whoa. Then if you can hear whoa, whoa, I have to cry into that again when I start getting to a certain pitch. I have to start crying into it. And it's a good but it does tend to move us into that locked, fixed yell. So I tend to use it as a litmus test more than a training tool. So when I do that, like I feel like if I can move up semitone by semitone with that higher whoa and not have it be locked and really fixed. So whoa, I can do something with that sound. Whoa, as opposed to a real heavy fixed sound. When I do that, I feel more resonance here than when I'm in a yell. Whoa, oh, oh, that's all here. But the whoa is all here. That makes sense. And it feels different inside my throat. I'm learning to access that more readily. In my own singing, I've had to work at. What was it? There was something in the song that I was working on singing the other day. And I wanted to keep defaulting to my previous way of singing it. And I had to keep stopping, and like it took me like a second to switch gears, like to find the right shaping and coordination, because it was something that was like, the other technique was so deeply ingrained because I've been singing it a certain way for so long that when I tried to apply a different technique to it, I had to like stop and think about it and work through it. And I had to do like little, like things to kind of get myself into that shaping. And then over time, what happens is it starts to become a new default setting. It starts to become a new habit. Thoughts, questions at this point? Did you try the rainbow exercise, Christine, at all? Okay, give that a try just for a second. So try it, do it like the real traditional call, like whoa. And then see what happens if you try to get it more into the mom space at the top. It helps if you do. Did it go okay? Yeah. Be interesting to calculate or to figure out how high up we go with this, because I guarantee most of us don't go past about an A with this exercise. But if you go into the mom space, I find I know I've gone up to C5 easily, and D. I think I've got even C sharp D easily with this exercise. But I have to get into mom and I have to get into cry. I think, Janet, did we talk about doing this with On My Own? Did you do this? Did you do On My Own with me at one point in a lesson?
I might have tried out those phrases. Yeah, the pretending phrase I find very difficult.
That's one of those cases where
because of the word.
Yeah, you have to go pretending. You can't be pretending if. It has to be eng.
Eng.
Eng, eng. Yeah. I'm in 2.5 months.
How does it go?
They've only been, there's that cry, been to compress it, pretending, and it has to go in, into an compressed sound, eng, almost like an E-N-G. But the it's only in my mind. It goes to that. Yeah. I'm talking to myself. Yeah, that part. Because that's definitely a belt. It's known as a belt.
Yeah. Yeah. That I have never knows. I have never known.
Yeah.
But my larynx does tend to go up.
It has to.
Yeah.
It has to. Remember, if you're going to track these, something has to change, right? So you have to raise that first formant. So you do it by shortening and narrowing the vocal tract. You do it by choosing vowels with higher first formants. So I shade as many of my vowels as possible to A, because it's got one of the highest first formants, right? My A's turn into A at some point, somewhere around, you know, the B for me. It starts adopting a little bit of an A-ishness to it. So there's that. So the known is kind of hard, but there you have to kind of go cry into it and get like an like almost like I would say with that vowel, I'd say like go into the Goethe vowel, where it's a combination of A and O. So the lips are saying O, like known, but the tongue is actually a little higher and more fronted. So it's saying A. And then cry into that, and then you've got yourself an easier belt. Did it work? Yeah. Yeah, so again, like what I said at the beginning, like having a knowledge, like understanding of which vowels work better and knowing which would be like sort of the next vowel in line for a modification, like it would be that's where I think makes a huge difference, is knowing how to go there. But also like we talk about, you know, all these vowels that we have in English, but there are other vowels that we can explore, like what we just did there was a mixed vowel, right? We don't have that vowel in English per se. I think some of us say things with that vowel. But like when I was saying pulled from the Addams Family, when I do like the that kind of like that French going into that, we don't really have that vowel in English, but I say food that way for some reason. I don't know. But going into that like was what made the difference for me, because I was able to find the right balance. But to try to go straight into like an ooh, I just couldn't do it. It just sounded like too heady in particular. So playing around with different mixed vowels, I feel like can really help us too. And then also I think knowing where our formants lie. Like if you go into that Ken Bozeman site, kenbozeman.com, and he's got those pedagogic resources. There's that one with the approximate first formant locations for each vowel based on voice type. So he's got one for basses, one for baritones, one for tenors, and then he's got like contraltos and mezzos and sopranos. And it would show you the approximate location of where those changes happen, with the turning over point a half a step lower than the actual approximate first formant location. But that's also a good thing. Janet, did you see the first video on Thursday?
I haven't yet.
Okay. There's at one point I was demonstrating something better than I'm demonstrating today. Where I was demonstrating like almost a closed voice, like acoustically closed, where the second harmonic actually does that. And it was more of like a classical approach. It doesn't sound classical, but you can hear that like classical tenor compression in the sound. And you'll hear that in some styles, like I always go back to like Moana, How Far I'll Go, when you hear that last sustained C5, she's acoustically closing off. She's not singing in a yell, and she's not singing in the mom. She's singing actually, it gets really dark and warm when she sings it, and that's what she's doing, is she's compressing it that way. But I did a better job of demonstrating it than I think I can do today for some reason. My voice is just not cooperating. But yeah, so there are different approaches there too, and there are times too when I acoustically close and I really compress that sound, kind of like my student that I played earlier, a little bit like how she does it. And it's a way of kind of getting around that like splatty kind of sound, is to really compress it and get like kind of like I hate to say it, like a grunt kind of, like almost like that grunt posture in your throat. And then learning to be able to control the airflow, which is a little bit of a trick. But you have to be really careful with that one. I wouldn't teach that one to students. But it's fun to explore when you get to that. And if you're studying, I know Jen, I think we've studied like a little bit of closed voice, right? That like Burton Coffin exercise, right? The E, I, and then the O. Yeah, that's the idea behind that one, is to achieve that like tenor-ish, operatic tenor-ish kind of sound in that area, that range.
Covering.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you can pseudo belt. By definition, this is not belt, but it can create a belt-like sound. That's why a lot of people think, when they hear operatic tenors, because there is a long closed quotient, and there's such big sounds. A lot of people describe it as belting, but I mean, an expert would say that it's not technically belting because they're not in, chest voice and they're not coupling that second harmonic with the first formant. So they're not technically belting, but it is this big fat sound that we can achieve, and I think we can tweak it a little bit. Like when I do that closed voice exercise with my students with it covering, right? Especially the males, is I let them keep the vowel more squeaky than acoustical. So the turning over point of their vowels is a little bit higher because the larynx is not as low, so the formants aren't quite as low. But you mentioned about the larynx too earlier, about it going up, but again, it has to kind of go up at some point. And I don't think we need to be afraid of the larynx going up. You don't want the feeling of constriction and squeeze, but there's a good squeeze that happens. Like I notice, I feel that when I sing certain ways, when I'm exploring things in my voice, where I feel the throat squeezing in different ways, but not in an uncomfortable way. I just feel that narrowing. And when I have that, I know it's actually protective. And what it's doing the job of, again, kind of narrowing the space to help create that loudness. If we try to approach belting, I think, from too open a space and too long a vocal tract, it's just going to end up turning over into a head voice. It's going to go yell for so long, but then it's going to limit, I think, the range in which we can actually belt. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts or questions before we go? It was really just intended to kind of like do a little bit of an overview. I did want to say too, when we were doing that, like, before, that's a good indicator of kind of how things should support, the support that you need for belting, like, and where it happens. Most of us will tend to feel it in those oblique and transverse muscles, a little bit in that abdominis rectus muscle in the front, but I like not to force too much there. It overpressurizes, I find, but just when you start, I feel like that's the support that you need for that sound. What's that exercise? We've done that one before. Some very easy. When you do that, it's that point there where a lot of us want to go, and we want to just kind of loosen the sound. But learning to embrace that and not changing it, that was the hardest thing for me. Like when I do that, I feel this working really hard because I'm really compressing the sound. That's it. I guess the other thing too is learning to like embrace that effort, because most of us don't want to. We want to go to it's looser, right? Squeezing that sound just a little bit. That's where you're going to get the power. It's the little squeeze inside the throat. Yeah. All right. What was that?
That was a good sound.
Oh, thanks. That's more the kind of closed voice that I was talking about, really, the squeeze that I had there, because I was starting in head voice and not in, because that's my M2, right? So if I wanted to turn it into more of a belt sound, then I just compress it more. And that, even without me even having to add a ton of weight, I can create more of a belt sound that way, without dragging up all the weight. But again, there are so many different approaches, and I find like I didn't do a good job of demonstrating all the different songs, but like, like we did like Choose to Be Mine, right? How it's got those two sections where it's like, okay, I can mix that or I can belt that. And I can, and that like Choose to Be Mine, that word mine, right? I can yell belt that, or I can mix belt it. And I can go into the mom, you know, and I prefer to go into the mom just because I've got more of a flexible approach to it. And I can, and especially like if that one section where she's sustaining like that section and she's going, ma, you know, she's like modulating that, right? If you're really in that pure yell, it's harder to get that flexibility to be able to move the voice doing that. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions before we go? Thoughts, observations?
What do you think the young age to do this vocally would be?
I think as long as the child is old enough to understand like the difference between, I think, the pure on like yell, playground yell, and the mom,
Yeah.
like the whiny thing, I think any age really. Because kids naturally, especially before puberty, they have a longer chest voice range than we have, right? Because then what happens is our formants lower as our vocal tracts lengthen, and we start to just lose that. So that's why kids are just naturally good belters in general, not everybody. Those who are a little bit more courageous will tend to be natural belters. And I think that at any point, if they're going to belt, then let them do it. Just let them do it correctly. Like help them, guide them to doing it correctly. If it's an 8-year-old can belt. You know, they can be really good belters. You just have to teach them to find that flexibility and balance in their sound. And I envy kids who are just natural belters because they have something that I never had growing up, and then I had to work at it so hard, and I still work at it because I'm still not a natural belter. I still have to, like, every song it's like, oh, now I got to figure this one out because it's a different pitch and it's a different vowel. Now I have to like think through it and I have to work through it and practice it and find that space. You know, I can't just like do it like other people can. So I say encourage that if they're just natural belters, but just make sure that they're keeping the flexibility in the sound. Work on the twang with them, work on the whimper, the cry. The cry is very protective. Like adding the cry into the sound, again, it thins the vocal folds but compresses the sound at the same time. So you almost can't really do damage that way. So if you teach them that, then that's going to help them stay healthy. But I think if they're gonna belt no matter what, and if they're gonna do it, you may as well just work with them on it.
Okay. Awesome.
And cross train with them though. Like make sure that they're working on their head voices. Yeah. Make sure that they're working on some of the classical techniques. Because when you do that, that's going to balance it out for them.
Right.
And it's going to help them as they move higher to be able to have the strength in the sound without just digging in and over pressurizing.
Okay.
All right. It was really good seeing you guys, meeting you, Christine. I'm going to go upload this right now, so I will send you guys emails in a little bit when it's ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if any questions come up later on, just let me know.
All right.
All right. Have a good rest of the day, and good evening to you, Janet.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.